In 1970, if you were thumbing through the Radio Shack catalog of that year, there is a very good chance that you may have came across their top-of-the-line AM/FM stereo receiver, the STA-120, at a price of $269.95, or about $2,140 in February 2024 US dollars. Now, they rated it at 140 watts per channel total power into 8 ohms, or 70 watts per channel into 8 ohms. But you had to look at the owner's manual to figure out that those specifications that they listed were kind of the ideal specs, and they couldn't really guarantee that performance. For the purposes of this video, I use the specifications provided in the service manual for the STA-120, and that is what I will compare its performance against. Now, it was a pretty neat receiver for the time, I guess, compared to some of the other ones that were available. And we'll go into some of the features. We'll obviously look at the front features and see what's going on in the back, and then I'll pop the cover and we'll see what it looks like from the top and the bottom, and then I will tell you how it performed, and then I'll tell you what I thought after hooking it up to a pair of speakers and a music source. Here's a close-up view of the STA-120, and we'll just start over here on the right. We've got volume controls here, which also are your balance controls. It's not my preferred way of doing things, but it does have a little advantage when you're testing and adjusting the levels more precisely. And we have our on-off power switch here. This is our tuner control right here for moving the dial tuner. We have the center tuning indicator. We have our signal strength meter there for the FM tuner, and we have a stereo indicator LED there. We have a three-way tone control with bass, mid-range, and treble inputs. We have a high filter, a low filter, a loudness filter. For the FM, we can turn the AFC on and off here. We've got our tape monitor switch here. We have a stereo mono switch there. Now this FM SS position, that means it's only going to tune stereo stations. This is our normal FM, so it would tune mono and stereo stations. Then we have AM, phono, and then an auxiliary input. We have our speaker control switches here for main speakers or remote speakers, and a 1/4-inch headphone jack there. I'm pretty sure that this loudness switch, the circuit, is affected by how much gain you have from the volume control circuit. So I think as you decrease the gain, the loudness switch has more of an effect. This obviously is the rear of the STA-120, and we'll start over here on the left with our speaker fuses for the left and right speakers. We also have under this shield here the output transistors. We have our unswitched AC outlet here, and then we have the main fuse, which is a slow blow fuse for the unit itself. Now for the speakers, we have some RCA connectors for main speakers, as well as these screw terminal connections. You can really only use one. Back in the day, really cheap speakers had RCA connectors on the end that you would plug into your amplifier, and then they were directly wired into the speaker. So if you had those speakers, you could plug right in. Otherwise, you would just use the screw terminals. And obviously, these are for the remote speakers. Your tape monitor circuit is here, and you can adjust the input gain of the tape monitor circuit, or the input to the tape monitor. Auxiliary input here, phono input here. The phono input does have a high and low sensitivity position. It's not for moving coil cartridge, it's just for different levels of, like if you had a ceramic cartridge or just a regular moving magnet, you could set the sensitivity up here to match as best as possible. Our grounding lug for the phono is here, and then we have our FM and AM antenna connectors there. Here is the view once you have the cover removed, looking down from the top of the STA-120. You can kind of just see the technology that was used. This is the front of the unit here. This board right here are where the preamp and tone controls reside. These boards here are for the tuner. This is part of the tuner, and that is the tuner there. And here's our power transformer. This guy right here is the driver board for the output stage. And we'll look at it from just a slightly different angle. And what you can see here, that this is the back of the STA-120 where the speakers connect. These two transformers here are part of the output stage. This driver board here drives these two transformers, which then drive the output transistors. And looking from the bottom, we have a view here that shows the bottom of the STA-120. Just shows you what's going on. And here is another view of the bottom from a slightly different angle. And it kind of just shows this right here would be the front of the STA-120. And it's just another view as to how everything was connected and built. Here is the THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz with the STA-120 putting out 5 watts into 8 ohms. You can see our THD for the right channel is at just shy of 1%, and the left channel is about 0.2%. Also, the right channel has a lower SNR by about 3 dB than the left channel. I've adjusted the left and right volume controls for 29 dB of gain. Here is our frequency response with the STA-120 putting out 5 watts into 8 ohm loads. The frequency starts off at 30 hertz at this end and goes up to 20 kilohertz. You can see that we do have a boost here of about 2.5 dB, at least for the right channel, at about 100 hertz. And then it looks flat. Once you get to about a kilohertz, it looks pretty flat. Now, I should point out that I have adjusted both the left and right volume controls to match the gains as best as I could. And there, probably the worst case would be maybe from here to here. That's probably, I don't know, half a dB, something like that. And also, the treble, bass, and mid-range controls have all been adjusted to give me the flattest response. Here we have the STA-120 putting out 20 watts into 8 ohms at 1 kilohertz. And there is a specification that it should be better than 1% THD at 20 watts. And we are indeed there. And our SNRs are right around 65, 67 dB. So it's meeting the requirement there. Here we have the STA-120 putting out 20 watts or so into 8 ohms at 10 kilohertz. And the reason for that is there is a specification that at 10 kilohertz and 20 watts, the THD should be less than 2.5%. And we are well better than that, maybe 0.25% for the right channel, and the left channel maybe, we'll call it 0.2% THD, and the SNRs are looking fairly decent for this guy. Here we have the STA-120 putting out 30 watts into 8 ohms, or maybe a little bit over 30 watts for the left channel. And we're at 1 kilohertz. There is a specification that the THD should be better than 2% at 1 kilohertz and 30 watts, both channels driven into 8 ohms. So we are meeting that requirement. We're under 1% at 30 watts. The SNRs improved a little bit from the 5 watt case, so we're at, we'll call it 65 dB at least for the SNRs. Here we have the STA-120 putting out 20 watts into 8 ohms at 100 hertz. And the specification is that the THD should be under 1% at 20 watts into 8 ohms. And we are indeed better than 1% at 20 watts into 8 ohms. Our SNRs are right around 63, 64 dB. Now, I should point out that the gain is still around 29 dB. But as you saw from the frequency response, there was a lot of gain. The most gain, I think, at 100 hertz. So I had to back down the volume controls a little bit and adjust my input signal level a little bit to get the 20 watts and the 29 dB of gain. Here is the frequency response from 30 hertz to 20 kilohertz, with the STA putting out about 20 watts into 8 ohms based at the 1 kilohertz setting. Now, there is a specification for the frequency response over this range, with it operating at 20 watts a channel, and that is plus 1.5 dB to minus 4 dB. Now, the gain was set for 29 dB for both channels, and the other thing is that the tone controls, the bass, mid-range, and treble controls have remained set for the flattest response that I could get at the start of the testing. So if we look at the specification of plus 1.5 dB, that would be right here. So we're a little bit over that, particularly for the right channel. However, we are pretty much flat, and we are definitely meeting the high end of the band, which was minus 4 dB. So it doesn't look too far off. It's a little bit ugly here with some of the little noise that we're seeing, but overall the frequency response is darn near meeting its requirement. Here is the STA-120's crosstalk, and this is with the active channel putting out 5 watts into 8 ohms. We are going from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. Now, there is no specification for the crosstalk, and we're going to say that the worst case would be up here at 20 kilohertz. So it's about, we'll call it 25, 26 dB, depending on the channel. And at the very low end of the band at 20 hertz, we're at about 32, 33 dB. So that's kind of what the crosstalk is for this old receiver. Even though there was no specification for multitone testing, this is what the STA-120 does when subjected to the multitone test. And the right channel is showing, we'll say, about 8 to maybe 9 bits of distortion-free range, while the left channel shows anywhere from about 10 to maybe 11 bits of distortion-free range. This plot shows the STA-170's output impedance from 30 hertz to 20 kilohertz. Now, there is no specification for the damping factor, but the very best case dampening factor would be about 14.5, and the worst damping factor would be for the left channel, and that would be about 8 here at 20 kilohertz. This plot shows the effect of some of the STA-120's filters. We're starting over here at 30 hertz, and this would be 20 kilohertz over here. This thick blue line, this guy right here, that is our flat line with the response set as flat as I could using the bass, mid-range, and treble controls. This red trace right here, this would be what happens when you flip the loudness on. It just boosts the bass like you see. The high filter, the purple line, it kind of just follows the flat line until it gets to around here, and you can see how it starts cutting out the high frequencies. Now, this green line right here, this is the low filter, what happens when you flip that on, and then it kind of stabilizes. Here is the system noise of the STA-120. In this case, I've selected the auxiliary input, and the inputs are terminated into shorts. We have the volume control set to give about 29 dB of gain, and the STA-120 is connected to 8 ohm loads. And you're just kind of looking at the noise level, which is predominantly, you have the largest contributor here is at 60 hertz. You have another one at 120, 180, and then it keeps on giving you multiples of 60 hertz. So that's kind of what it looks like. And I have hooked this up to some speakers and listened to it, and indeed you do hear the 60 hertz hum. That's kind of would be expected with levels like this. Here is a plot showing the THD SNR 1 kilohertz of the phono input to the tape monitor output. In this case, a 5 millivolt signal is being applied to the phono input, and there is a switch in the back, and I have that set for phono low. If you had a really overly powerful moving magnetic cartridge, you would set that to the high position, but it's in the low position. There is a specification that the SNR should be better than 50 dB, so we're actually doing pretty good. The THD is better than 0.03%, let's say. And you can see the gain of the phono stage here is almost 43 dB. Here is the frequency response of the phono stage, which once again is moving magnet, and it's being measured at the tape monitor output. Now the frequency range is a little bit different. We have 70 hertz here, and then we have 10 kilohertz here, so it's not nearly the 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz that we typically look at, but it was specified between that frequency range, and it said that the frequency response with the RIAA equalization applied should be plus or minus 2 dB. Well, at the high end of the band at 10 kilohertz, we're at about 3 dB on the plus side, and then over here at between maybe, so that's 150 hertz, I'm guessing, we're up at maybe 4 dB. So it is failing that. Plus we have this noise, and I'm guessing this has to do with some of the power supply ripple feeding into this frequency response. I should point out that the case for the STA-120 is made out of real wood, and the guy weighs about 31, 32 pounds. Now, the other thing I did to it that I did mention earlier was I replaced all the lamps. It has 2 lamps for the FM tuning, and then there's fuse type lamps on either side of the display here to provide the backlit display, and those I replaced with LEDs. The others I replaced with incandescent bulbs, which I happen to have. So other than that, and freeing up the bass and the mid-range control pots, which involve removing the cover and then tilting it up and squirting in some like a penetrant that loosens nuts up, and kind of just a little bit in there at a time and try to work it, and finally they got free, and then I put some machine oil in there, and that all seems to work good. Also, I did lube several of the switches and all of the potentiometers in here, so that's kind of how that went. Now, I decided not to replace any of the capacitors. When I looked at the ripple on them, it was pretty small overall. I think you'd have to go in and start replacing a lot of the filter caps in the preamp section, and then the driver section, and in the power supply section. So to me, that would be a lot of work. And as you saw in the test data, there was hum at 60 hertz and 120 and 180 hertz. And when I hooked it up to my Wilson Watt 3 Puppy 2 speakers, which I do, and terminate the auxiliary input and select the auxiliary input and listen for sound with the volume at about 2, which is where it is now, you heard the hum. And the nice thing is that once it started playing, the hum went away. I mean, it's there, you just don't really hear it. So it didn't seem to be that value added for this particular receiver to go through and do a recap job. And I'm sure its owner wouldn't have wanted to have me do all that with the amount that would probably entail. So anyway, it sounded really good. Once I got it going, I used my little Surfans music player. I listened to the tracks I normally do. I do like the loudness on, which I almost always do for receivers or integrated amps. And it sounded really good, to be totally honest. The hum was not a factor, and it just sounded good. I was able to hit probably a 92 dB SPL, and there was no problems. It doesn't get hot, and it's just a neat receiver. I'm sure that it will be on somebody's list somewhere to get one of these, and if you can find one for the right price, or if you're good at fixing things, there's schematics online and service manual and that kind of thing. So there seems to be a lot of support for it, and I thought it worked, really, really good. So, it may not have measured the best, although it did meet most of its specifications that were provided in the service manual. And so it's about a 30 watt a channel into 8 ohms, both channel driven kind of receiver at maybe a little less than 1%, something like that, I think is what the data showed. So I forgot to test it into 4 ohm loads, but I'm sure it would work okay, although I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't get that much more power out of it if you did. I didn't listen to the phono stage. I'm guessing it would have been a little bit hummy, but it may have worked okay for a lot of people, but I just normally don't listen to phono stages, so that is what it is. So that's kind of my take on this guy. I thought it was a cool looking unit and it sounded fine. If you happen to run across one, I would pick it up for the right price if you're able to fix it. And if you're not able to fix it, make sure you have a shop that's able to work on it. It's pretty easy to get to a lot of the things, but not everything. And so that's just something to keep in mind. Once again, if you have any comments or questions about the video, please leave them in the area below that YouTube provides. If you like the video, be sure to hit the thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel, that would be a great thing to do to help the channel grow. So once again, I thank you for watching, and until next time, have a great day or night.